Welcome back to the Mythic Library, where the ancient, the forbidden, and the forgotten are brought into the light once more. Today, you are about to enter one of the most unsettling and misunderstood stories in all of ancient lore. A story older than kings, older than civilizations, older even than the earliest written scriptures. A story about beings who crossed the boundary between heaven and earth and paid the ultimate price. If you're ready to uncover where the Watchers came from, why they descended, how they shaped the world, and what judgment still hangs over them, make sure you stay until the end, because what follows is not just mythology. It is a map of cosmic rebellion. Let's begin. They were not warriors, at least not at first. They were not fallen angels, not demons, not creatures of chaos. They were patriots of heaven, administrators, guardians, watchers. Their task was simple: observe humanity, guide but never interfere, watch but never touch, protect but never rule. In the earliest ages of the world, before the flood, when humans were still young and the earth was wildly untamed, these beings were sent as overseers, and because their role was to watch, they became known simply and forever as the Watchers. Imagine an earth without boundaries, without cities, without kingdoms, without written law. Humanity was learning to survive, but it was still fragile. Floods, storms, wild animals, erupting mountains, and the sheer unpredictability of life made existence a struggle. Ancient texts describe humans as children, physically mature but spiritually clueless. Heaven, in all its ordered brilliance, feared that humanity might destroy itself before it ever had a chance. So, a decision was made. A group of angels, some say 200, others say more, were assigned to Earth. They would remain in the shadows, unseen, guiding the development of early civilization. They were not gods, not rulers, not saviors. They were guardians, with strict boundaries. But boundaries, even heavenly ones, do not always hold. The Watchers' arrival is described in legends as a descent not of fire and thunder, but of brilliance. They came down on Mount Hermon, a mountain so old and so mysterious that it later became associated with supernatural activity. The descent was not rebellion yet. It was assignment, a mission. The leader, according to many traditions, was named Semyaza, a commanding presence, wise, disciplined, loyal at least at first glance. Under him were captains, specialists, watchers of different domains: astronomy, agriculture, warfare, metallurgy, medicine, sorcery, and more. Each had expertise meant to help humanity grow, but only in small, subtle ways. No direct teaching, no sharing of divine secrets, no breaking of the heavenly code. For centuries, maybe millennia, the Watchers observed humanity quietly. They learned our habits, our fears, our desires. They watched humans love, fight, raise children, build homes. And over time, something unexpected happened. The Watchers began to feel. Unlike humanity, angels were not created to experience deep, impulsive emotion. They knew loyalty, reverence, duty, but not longing, not temptation, not jealousy, and most dangerously of all, not desire. Yet as they watched human beings beautiful, imperfect, powerful in their vulnerability, they began to change. Something awakened in them that had never existed before. It started subtly, a glance that lingered too long, a fascination with how humans formed families, a curiosity about emotions they themselves had never been allowed to feel. Some watched the creativity of early humans with admiration. Others watched their struggles and felt a kind of protective affection. But there were those who watched human women, and something within them cracked open. Semyaza saw it first. His soldiers, once disciplined and unwavering, became distracted. Their reports grew shorter, their attention divided, and soon the Watchers confided in him what they could no longer hide. They desired the daughters of men. They wanted to join with them. They wanted families. They wanted what heaven had never granted them. Semyaza resisted. He knew the consequences. The heavenly law was absolute. An angel crossing into human intimacy was an unthinkable violation, a merging of realms that must never happen. If one watcher fell, judgment would come for all. But the growing desire among his ranks was too strong, and Semyaza feared something else, not just heavenly punishment, but that if he refused to lead them, they would act anyway. So he gathered them on Mount Hermon, under the night sky. The moonlight glowed against their luminous forms. The air trembled with tension. There, Semyaza issued a warning. If we do this thing, we will be bound by a curse. We will be judged. We will fall. But the watchers, caught between duty and desire, stood firm. Some hesitated, others were resolute. But what united them that night was a pact, a vow sealed with trembling voices and cosmic consequence. They swore that if judgment came, they would share the punishment together, no matter how severe. The pact was sealed, and the descent transformed into rebellion. The watchers began to take wives from among humans. To the daughters of men, these angels were beings of impossible beauty and power. To the early world, they appeared as gods walking among mortals. Their children, the hybrid offspring of heaven and earth, would become the most terrifying beings ever recorded in ancient lore. But before the Nephilim would rise, something else began to shift. The Watchers did not simply take wives, they brought knowledge, forbidden knowledge, advanced knowledge, knowledge humanity was never meant to receive too early. Azazel, one of the most infamous among them, taught men how to craft weapons of war, forging blades and shields, turning simple conflict into organized violence. He taught women the arts of cosmetics and adornment, introducing vanity, seduction, and manipulation into a world that once lived simply. To some, he brought power. To others, corruption. Another watcher, Raphael, taught the secrets of the earth, how to extract metals, how to shape them, how to manipulate the raw materials of creation. Kokabel revealed astronomy, mapping the heavens, giving humans the knowledge of stars that was meant only for celestial beings. Barakiel taught weather patterns. Penemu taught writing, a divine technology that granted humans the ability to preserve knowledge, but also to spread deceit. Gadriel, some say, was the same being who influenced the earliest act of temptation in Eden. In a single generation, humanity advanced dramatically and dangerously. Civilization blossomed, but so did corruption. War became systemic. Magic and sorcery, once unknown, began to spread. The natural balance that heaven intended for early humanity shattered, and then came the children, the Nephilim. They were giants not merely in stature, but in power and appetite. Their hunger was insatiable. They devoured resources, then animals, then humans, and finally each other. They ruled early tribes as tyrants, claiming divine lineage. Their violence multiplied across the earth until the cries of humanity reached heaven, and heaven finally listened. The archangels, those who remained loyal, were the first to see the terrible shift. Michael, the warrior of heaven, looked upon the chaos with righteous fury. Uriel, keeper of heavenly wisdom, saw how the secrets of heaven had been twisted. Raphael, healer of realms, felt the earth itself groan under the weight of corruption. Heaven had been patient, but now the balance of creation was breaking. The Most High issued a command, a decree that echoed through every level of the heavens. The Watchers would be judged, their children destroyed, the earth cleansed. Before the final decree was carried out, the loyal archangels were sent to deliver warnings and commands. Michael was tasked with binding the rebel leaders. Uriel was to announce judgment to Noah, the one righteous man who walked with God. Raphael would imprison Azazel, whose teachings had corrupted the earth the most. But the Watchers, once guardians, now rebels, were not ready to face their fate. It is said that when the archangels descended, the Watchers trembled. They had seen the power of Michael before. They knew Uriel's voice could unravel secrets they had tried to hide. They knew Raphael's presence could purify corruption and expose guilt. So, the Watchers did something unexpected. They begged for mercy. They pleaded with Enoch, the holy man who walked with heaven, to intercede for them. Their leader, Semyaza, once proud, now fell to his knees in despair. Azazel raged, but could not escape the consequences he had set in motion. Enoch recorded their cries, their trembling, their fear. He brought their petition to the throne, but the answer was final. There will be no forgiveness. The Watchers had crossed the unthinkable line between heaven and earth, between spirit and flesh, between duty and desire. And now, judgment was inevitable. All that remained was the sentence, and that sentence would change the world forever. The cries of the Watchers still echoed across the mountains when Enoch departed to deliver their petition, an act that showed just how desperate these once powerful beings had become. But heaven had already made its judgment, and from this point forward, the story of the Watchers becomes a story not of rebellion, but of consequences. Catastrophic, cosmic, irreversible consequences that would reshape the world and seal the fate of angels and humans alike. But to understand their punishment, we must first understand the scale of their crime. The early world was collapsing. The Nephilim, the hybrid giants born from angels and women, were spreading chaos across the earth at a rate humanity could no longer endure. Tribes that once hunted and farmed now lived in fear. Villages vanished overnight. Ancient traditions speak of towering beings who could uproot trees, crush stone, and consume livestock in a day. Their appetites had no limits, and neither did their domination. The Watchers had not expected this. They had intended to create children offspring to experience emotion, family, for affection. But what they had produced was something else entirely. They had created beings with power too great for a mortal world to sustain. Their very existence pushed the earth toward imbalance. Some of the Watchers, faced with the horror of what they'd made, began to regret their actions. Others embraced their new roles as kings, fathers of godlike giants, and a select few doubled down on their corruption, seeking greater control over humanity through forbidden teachings. The lines between teacher, tyrant, and monster blurred. Heaven, however, saw everything with perfect clarity. From the upper realms, Uriel watched the unfolding chaos like a spreading shadow across creation. He saw how Azazel's metallurgy had birthed the first organized warfare. He witnessed the Nephilim wield blades carved from heavenly techniques, dominating entire regions. He saw men teach their sons the secrets they should never have known. He saw women transformed by cosmetics and enchantments that twisted human beauty into manipulation and obsession. Michael, heaven's great commander, saw something even worse: the emotional decay of the Watchers themselves. Once loyal servants of heaven, they now lived as creatures torn between fear and defiance. Some hid in mountain caves, trembling at the sight of storms, believing judgment was near. Others roamed openly, bragging to humans about their power and lineage. A few tried to convince themselves they had done nothing wrong, that humanity benefited from their gifts. But heaven had made its decision. The world had to be cleansed. The Watchers had to be contained. Their offspring had to be destroyed. And humanity needed a warning, a message delivered not with wrath, but with clarity. This is where Noah enters the story. Long before the flood became a symbol of destruction, Noah was known as the quiet, righteous man of a violent world. He was not a king, not a warrior, not a prophet in the traditional sense. He was a man who listened to the earth, to the heavens, to the whisper of divine presence that still lingered among the chaos. Uriel was the one chosen to visit him. The descent of an archangel is never described in simple terms. It was not thunder, not lightning, not fire. It was revelation, a moment where the spiritual world bleeds into the physical, and reality bends around truth. When Uriel appeared before Noah, time itself seemed to pause. Uriel's message was not a threat, but a warning. The earth cries out. The blood of the innocent rises to heaven. The corruption of the Watchers spreads like poison. A great cleansing must come. Noah did not argue. He did not question the divine judgment. He simply asked what he must do. That alone, according to ancient traditions, proved his righteousness. Uriel then revealed something even more unsettling. Noah himself appeared different from birth, as if touched by heaven, a sign that he was chosen for a role larger than any human had ever played. Some ancient texts imply that his purity was a symbolic counterweight to the corruption of the Watcher's children. But the judgment was not only about the flood, it was also about the imprisonment, a punishment reserved for the Watchers themselves. And for that, Michael stepped into the story with full celestial authority, while Uriel guided Noah, and Raphael prepared to bind Azazel. Michael was given the heaviest order: bind the leaders of the Watchers, strip them of their authority, imprison them beneath the earth until the final judgment. Michael did not hesitate. He had seen rebellion before long ago, in the wars of heaven. He recognized the same pattern here: pride, desire, deception, corruption. But unlike the previous rebellion, the Watchers had crossed into the physical realm. They had interfered with creation itself. Their judgment required a physical, not just spiritual, consequence. Michael gathered the loyal host and descended upon the mountain where the Watchers had made their pact. The air crackled with their presence. The mountain shook beneath them. It was not war, no sword clashed, no angelic battle erupted. The Watchers, consumed by dread, did not resist. They fell to their knees before Michael, trembling like men awaiting execution. Semyaza, their leader, stepped forward. He had once commanded respect, strength, and discipline. Now his brilliance was dimmed. His voice quivered. He tried to speak, to ask for mercy, but Michael raised his hand, silencing him. "You knew the law," Michael said. "You broke the boundary between heaven and earth. You taught forbidden things. You corrupted the children of men. The earth cries out because of you." Semyaza bowed his head. The mountain wind carried his whisper. "We were not prepared for desire." Michael's expression did not change. Heaven did not judge intention, it judged action, and action had consequences. One by one, the Watchers were bound, not with chains forged of metal, but with bonds woven of spiritual force restraints that no power on earth could break. These were not meant to punish their bodies, but to imprison their essence. Yet one rebel required a different approach. Azazel. His corruption was unique. Where others fell because of desire, Azazel fell because of ambition. He had not only broken the heavenly code, he had actively taught humans the weapons and sorceries that would destroy civilizations. His influence had spread not just through his offspring, but through all humanity. Every blade forged, every deceit spoken through writing, every charm crafted from cosmetics bore a trace of his rebellion. Raphael was sent to deal with him. The confrontation between Raphael and Azazel is one of the most dramatic scenes in ancient lore. Raphael, known for healing, approached Azazel, not with gentleness, but with divine wrath. Azazel did not kneel. He did not beg. He fought not with weapons, but with defiance. The earth trembled beneath them. Mountains cracked. But Raphael, empowered by the decree of heaven, subdued him and bound him hand and foot. His punishment was severe. Azazel was to be cast into a desert ravine, a place of utter desolation. Some traditions name this place Dudael, an abyss where the earth itself seems lifeless. There, buried beneath jagged stones, Azazel would remain in darkness until the final judgment. His teachings were condemned. His legacy declared a curse. Meanwhile, the other Watchers were led beneath the mountains, deep into the caverns of the earth. Their punishment was not death, but imprisonment, a conscious, eternal waiting, a silence more terrible than destruction. And the sentence was specific. They would be bound for 70 generations. 70 generations, not as random number, but symbolic of fullness, completion, and cosmic timing. A span long enough for humanity to recover, for civilizations to rise and fall, and for the impact of their rebellion to fade into myth and legend. Yet the judgment did not end with their imprisonment. there was still the matter of the Nephilim. Their destruction would not come from angels, but from nature itself. Heaven would send the flood not just as punishment, but as mercy, a reset for a world swallowed by corruption. Enoch, after delivering the Watcher's petition and witnessing heaven's response, played a final role. He recorded the decrees, the warnings, the judgments. He saw visions of the future, of the final days when the Watchers would be released for judgment. But before that, he vanished, taken by God, escaping death itself. As Enoch departed the earth, something shifted across the supernatural realm. The Watchers felt it, the loss of their one intercessor. Their despair grew. Bound in darkness, they cried out, not for power, not for freedom, but for what they had lost, their place in heaven, the light they once knew, the paradise they abandoned for desire. And above them, in the world of men, the clouds began to gather. The rains prepared to fall. The waters prepared to rise. Judgment was coming for the Watchers, for the Nephilim, for the world. The age of giants was ending. The age of cleansing was about to begin. The world stood on the edge of transformation, an age poised between the ruin, born of angelic rebellion, and the cleansing judgment that had been whispered across the heavens. Yet before the flood waters would reshape the earth, the tension between heaven and the Watchers reached a breaking point. Bound beneath the mountains, their wings dimmed, their glory fading, the Watchers entered a period of despair so deep that even the stones around them seemed to absorb their sorrow. The earth itself felt heavier, as if groaning beneath the weight of their corruption. The skies darkened more often. Strange storms appeared in places where rain had never fallen. The Nephilim, sensing a shift in the balance of creation, grew restless. These hybrids giants, in every sense of the word, were not merely physical beings. They were spiritual anomalies. Their existence was tied directly to the presence of the Watchers. And as their fathers were bound, the Nephilim felt their own power crackle with instability. But the giants did not fade quietly. Even as the Watchers were imprisoned, their children continued to rule the earth with brutality unmatched by any later civilization. Tribes bowed before them in fear. Some worshipped them as gods, believing their extraordinary power to be proof of divinity. Written memories had not yet spread across the world, so their legends survived in stories that later cultures would reinterpret as tales of titans, demigods, monstrous kings, and ancient heroes. Yet the truth behind these myths was far darker. The Nephilim were not heroic guardians. They were consumers of land, of life, of entire communities. Their rivalry with one another transformed the earth into battlegrounds of impossible scale. Massive footprints marked the hillsides for generations. Forests lay trampled, rivers rerouted, mountains cracked under the force of their conflicts. It was as though the planet itself resisted their presence. And this resistance grew louder, more desperate, until it reached the heavens again. Raphael, after binding Azazel, returned to witness the aftermath. He saw what the Nephilim had become, creatures born from heavenly brilliance, but twisted by earthly constraint. Their spirits, half angelic and half human, were not stable. They were filled with raging hunger and instinctive dominance, a combination that made them unpredictable and impossible to control. Raphael realized the truth. If left unchecked, the Nephilim would consume the world long before the judgment of water arrived. Meanwhile, in the higher realms, Michael received new orders. Heaven's decree extended beyond the Watcher's imprisonment. The Nephilim had to be destroyed, not punished, not imprisoned, eradicated. Their hybrid nature meant they could not be redeemed, for their existence itself was an imbalance, a violation of the designed order. It was not cruelty, it was correction. But the destruction of the Nephilim would not be carried out by angels alone. The earth itself would rise up against them. Natural disasters increased. The ground trembled beneath their steps. Volcanic eruptions burst from mountains that had slept for millennia. Rivers overflowed, drowning regions where the giants thrived. Animals fled from territories ruled by Nephilim, sensing impending catastrophe. Some Nephilim retaliated, attacking anything that threatened them. Others, in their arrogance, attempted to challenge the heavens. Legends whisper that a few even hurled stones at the sky, massive boulders that shattered into dust before reaching the clouds. Their fury thundered across the world, but heaven remained unmoved. While chaos grew on earth, the Watchers sank deeper into hopelessness. Inside the caverns where Michael had bound them, silence reigned. Darkness pressed against their forms like a suffocating blanket. But worse than the physical confinement was the spiritual separation. These beings, who once bathed in the unfiltered light of heaven, now lived without even a whisper of divine presence. Their minds filled with regret, fear, and the agonizing knowledge that they had doomed not only themselves, but an entire generation of beings. Semyaza, their leader, felt the crushing weight of responsibility more than any other. Every echo of suffering on earth pierced him like a blade. His once commanding voice had become a whisper, repeating the same haunting question. Why did we descend? But the answer was simple and terrible, because they wanted what they were never meant to have. Their grief grew unbearable when they learned of Enoch's disappearance. Enoch, the one man who had walked between heaven and earth, who had heard their petitions, who had offered them a sliver of hope, was gone, taken, transformed, removed from the cycle of life. To the Watchers, Enoch had been a bridge. With him gone, the bridge collapsed. The imprisoned angels wept, and their tears, according to ancient law, became part of the waters that would soon flood the earth. Meanwhile, Noah worked. Uriel's revelation had set him on a path few could understand. He built a vessel larger than any structure ancient humanity had ever seen. People mocked him at first. Even the Nephilim laughed, towering over his construction site, wondering why a man would build a ship on dry land. But Noah continued. Some legends say giants attempted to destroy the ark. Others say they begged Noah to let them aboard. Still, others claim that certain Nephilim tried to repent, but their nature made true repentance impossible. Whatever the truth, their fate was sealed. As Noah prepared the ark, the heavens prepared the storm. Uriel looked upon humanity one last time, marking those who still held righteousness in their hearts. Raphael purified the earth's waters in preparation for the deluge. Michael stood guard at the boundary between the physical and spiritual realms, ensuring that no force, watcher, or Nephilim could interfere with the divine timeline. And deep beneath the mountains, the Watchers felt something shift in the fabric of creation. It was beginning. The skies darkened in a way the world had never experienced. Thunder rolled with a sound that shook the bones of the earth. Winds spiraled across the lands. Animals fled their habitats and gathered at Noah's Ark, drawn by an instinct older than any language. Humans looked up at the sky with dread, realizing too late that Noah had not been mad. As the first massive drops of rain fell, the Nephilim roared in defiance. They marched across the land, attempting to escape the rising waters. Some climbed mountains, others tried to dig into caves, but the waters chased them relentlessly. The giants who once towered over humanity were now reduced to helpless figures struggling against a force they could not overpower. For the first time, they felt fear, and beneath the earth, the Watchers felt every scream. Bound and powerless, they sensed the destruction of their children. The Nephilim were not simply their offspring, they were their legacy. Their downfall echoed through the spiritual bonds that tied them together. Some Watchers cried out for forgiveness. Others screamed in rage. A few fell into silent despair, knowing that everything they had desired had turned into ruin. And the waters kept rising. Entire forests disappeared under the flood. Valleys transformed into oceans. Human settlements dissolved in a matter of hours. The sound of rushing water drowned out all other noise. The sky remained dark for weeks, the rain unending. Inside the ark, Noah and his family waited, listening to the storm outside, a storm that represented not only punishment but rebirth. Meanwhile, the Watchers remained suspended in timeless misery. They felt the cleansing of the world, but could do nothing. They felt the destruction of the Nephilim, but could not intervene. They sensed the shift in cosmic balance, but remained trapped in spiritual chains. And through it all, a single decree from heaven echoed in their minds. You will be bound for 70 generations, not destroyed, not erased, bound. Their judgment was long-term. Their final punishment was yet to come. They would watch, ironically, fittingly from the shadows as humanity rebuilt, as civilizations rose, as nations formed, as scriptures were written, as kings and empires came and went. They would linger in the depths until the appointed time. But the flood did more than cleanse the earth. It set the stage for something else, something that would determine the destiny of the Watchers, the fate of their spirits, and the strange future of their children after death. For when a Nephilim dies, its body returns to the earth, but its spirit does not. And that secret, what became of the spirits of the giants, is a story the ancient texts say leads directly into the rise of demons. But that part of the tale lies ahead. For now, the waters receded. The ark came to rest. Noah stepped into a new world. The Watchers remained in darkness, and heaven began preparing the next phase of judgment, a phase that would involve not just the earth, but the spiritual realm itself. The waters had withdrawn. The storm had ended. The sun pierced the clouds like a blade splitting the curtains of heaven. The world that emerged after the flood was unrecognizable, a landscape reshaped, purified, almost eerily silent. What had once been forests, valleys, and settlements was now bare earth, washed clean of corruption. Only echoes remained of what had been lost, the cries of the giants, the rebellion of the Watchers, and the memories of civilizations that perished beneath the waves. But in the silence that followed, something else stirred, something invisible, restless, and hungry. The Watchers, though imprisoned, still had a connection to their children, not through voice or vision, but through the spiritual residue their offspring left behind. The Nephilim had died, their bodies swept away by the flood, but their spirits did not return to heaven. They could not. They were not human. They were not angelic. They were trapped between realms, a new kind of being that creation had no place for. And so, as the waters receded, the world filled with presences unseen. This was the birth of the evil spirits upon the earth, the disembodied remnants of the Nephilim. To understand their origin, one must understand the structure of creation. Humans die, and their spirits return to the place appointed for them. Angels, being immortal, do not die in the same sense. But the Nephilim, born of heaven and earth, carried a hybrid essence that did not fit into the cosmic order. When their bodies perished, their souls were rejected by both realms. They became wanderers, restless, hostile, bound to the earth they once ruled. And because their nature had always been violent, destructive, and driven by appetite, their spirits inherited those same impulses. They sought influence. They sought bodies. They sought the living. They became the origin of what later generations would call demons, not fallen angels, not ancient gods, but the lingering consciousness of giants destroyed in the flood. And the Watchers felt every moment of it. Bound in darkness, Semyaza sensed his offspring drifting across the earth like shadows searching for form. He felt their hunger, their confusion, their rage, and worst of all, he felt their desire to return to the world of flesh, a desire they could never fulfill. Azazel, buried in Uriel beneath scorching stone, felt something different. His influence lived on through the knowledge he gave humanity. Even after the flood, metallurgy resurfaced. Cosmetics reappeared. Sorcery reawakened in fragments. Wherever humans rediscovered these arts, Azazel's presence flickered like embers beneath ash. Michael had seen this outcome long before the judgment fell. Uriel understood the spiritual physics behind it. Raphael pitied the humans who would one day encounter these disembodied giants. But heaven had made a distinction. The Watchers would be punished for their crime. Their children would face extinction. Their spirits would remain trapped until the final judgment, but humanity would continue, and this time, with far less direct contact from the divine realm. When Noah's family stepped onto the renewed earth, the air was different. The silence felt almost sacred, as though heaven was giving them a fresh beginning. The covenant that followed the rainbow arching across the sky was not simply a promise that water would never again destroy the earth. It was also a sign that the age of direct heavenly intervention had shifted. No more watchers descending from mountains. No more divine beings teaching secret arts. No more hybrids born of heaven and earth. The new world was meant to be distinctly human, yet the Watcher's influence had not vanished. It lingered in three devastating forms: the spiritual presence of the Nephilim, the forbidden knowledge left behind, the imprisoned angels, whose fate remained unresolved. This triad of corruption would quietly shape the world for generations. But something else also emerged in the aftermath: a heavenly court case, still open, still active, still echoing across time. The judgment of the Watchers was not completed at the flood. It was only the beginning. Michael, returning to the higher realms after enforcing the imprisonment, reported on the success of the binding. Yet, he also reported something unexpected. The Watchers were remorseful, terrified, broken. Some were angry, some were numb, but most were crushed by guilt. Their pleas haunted the caverns beneath the earth. Their tears, described in ancient texts, ran like rivers through the cracks in stone. This was not a rebellion powered by hatred against heaven. It was a rebellion powered by desire. And desire is a heavier chain than hatred. Uriel, ever the interpreter of divine mysteries, approached the Most High with a question that would echo through ages. What shall become of them in the end? The answer was sealed until the appointed time. Meanwhile, humanity began to rebuild. Noah's descendants spread across the land, forming tribes, settlements, early nations. As generations passed, memories of the flood faded. Myths replaced eyewitness accounts. The giants became legends told around fires, exaggerated into tales of mighty heroes or monstrous beings from a forgotten age. But the truth was far stranger than the stories. The spirits of the Nephilim, still restless, still roaming, began interacting with humans again. Not physically, as before, but spiritually. They whispered in dreams, they stirred fears, they influenced wars. They magnified human aggression. They attached themselves to individuals, places, objects, moments of vulnerability. They discovered they could mimic gods, or pose as departed ancestors, or inspire new forms of worship centered on blood, fear, and sacrifice. Humanity thought these spirits were divine. They were not. They were the lost, angry remnants of the giants, and the Watchers, still trapped, sensed all of it. Semyaza's sorrow deepened as he witnessed the consequence of his decision play out across centuries. He understood now that desire had not only destroyed his place in heaven, it had unleashed a chain reaction that warped the spiritual landscape of the world. But there was another Azazel, whose legacy was far from passive. Even imprisoned, his influence persisted more strongly than any other Watcher. The rebellious arts he introduced resurfaced in nearly every ancient civilization. Early metallurgy gave rise to weaponized society. Magic evolved into occult systems. Ornamentation distorted. Natural beauty into manipulation. Warfare became organized, strategic, destructive. Azazel's punishment in Uriel was severe for this reason. He had not only corrupted himself, he had corrupted civilization. But one question remained. How? How could a bound angel still influence humanity? The answer lay not in physical action, but in memory. The knowledge he'd given humans before the flood did not vanish. It survived in fragments, re-emerging whenever a tribe rediscovered metalworking, cosmetics, sorcery, divination, or advanced crafting techniques. His fingerprints stained human culture like ink soaked into parchment. As centuries passed after the flood, heaven watched. Michael saw nations rise. Raphael saw disease and healing develop. Uriel saw the re-emergence of forbidden knowledge. And all three saw humanity edging once again toward corruption, not at the scale of the Watcher's era, but enough to remind heaven of the fragility of the human heart. Yet this time, heaven did not send another legion of Watchers. The cost had been too great. Instead, heaven allowed humanity to choose to evolve morally, socially, spiritually, without direct oversight. Prophets would emerge, covenants would form, laws would be given, but no angelic guardians, no demigods, no hybrid offspring would walk the earth again. The world had changed permanently, but the Watcher's imprisonment was not eternal. Not yet. 70 generations, a timer set by the divine. And with every passing generation, the moment approached when their case would reopen. Many cultures of the ancient world dimly remembered this. Some spoke of gods punished beneath mountains, waiting for release. Others described beings trapped in the abyss, destined to rise at the end of time. Still others recounted stories of chained spirits, fallen stars, imprisoned lords of heaven. All these myths were fractured memories of one event, the binding of the Watchers. Below the earth, Semyaza waited. Azazel fumed. The captains grieved. The lesser Watchers whispered regrets and curses alternately, and time marched toward the inevitable moment of their final judgment. But one more development would reshape the legacy of the Watchers across future ages. As humans spread across continents, the spirits of the Nephilim followed. They inhabited regions, attached themselves to temples, influenced kings, inspired violence. They became known by many names: Shadim, daimones, unclean spirits, shadow beings, Rephaim, and dozens more. Their presence was a constant reminder of the Watchers' sin, yet the Watchers could not escape what they had started. Every whisper of a demon was a whisper of their corruption. Every ritual of blood was a shadow of their rebellion. Every violent empire reflected the echoes of the giants. Humanity believed these spirits were gods, ancestors, monsters, or divine messengers, but heaven knew what they truly were: lost children of a forbidden union, and the Watchers felt each one like a wound that would not heal. All the while, heaven waited for the 70 generations to pass, for the final confrontation, for the ultimate fate of the Watchers to unfold. But their story was not finished, not even close, for the Watchers' influence would reappear in unexpected ways throughout human history. Their names would echo in ancient texts. Their legacy would shape religions, myths, and occult traditions, and their final judgment would be more dramatic than their fall. But to understand that culmination, we must walk through the eras shaped by their aftermath, the rising and falling of cultures touched by their influence, and the movements of the Archangels who continued guarding humanity from their lingering shadow. The next chapter reveals how the world, still young, still fragile, struggled under the invisible weight of the Watcher's legacy. The new world that emerged after the flood was young, raw, and strangely quiet. The storms had passed, the waters had retreated, and the land had been reshaped into unfamiliar contours. Mountain chains shifted, valleys deepened, and coastlines carved by unimaginable force. Humanity was beginning again from a single family. Yet despite this fresh beginning, the spiritual atmosphere of the earth had changed permanently. For though the bodies of the Nephilim were gone, their spirits remained. Though the Watchers were imprisoned, their legacy lingered. Though heaven had cleansed the world, the scars of the past refused to fade. This is the era many ancient traditions refer to as the Age of Shadows, a period when humanity struggled to grow while unseen forces moved restlessly across the world. At first, Noah's descendants lived peacefully. They farmed the renewed soil, tended animals, and built homes along the hillsides. But as generations multiplied and people spread across new lands, memory of the flood shifted from a lived experience into a legend. The warnings of corruption faded. The covenant was remembered more for the rainbow than for the judgment behind it. And in the cracks of that fading memory, the shadows stirred. The spirits of the Nephilim, disembodied, hostile, unable to enter heaven or escape earth, followed the expanding human tribes. At first they lingered near ruins buried beneath mud and stone. They haunted regions where their bodies had perished, but eventually, they learned something new: influence. No longer possessing physical strength, they discovered how to whisper into human minds, not clearly, not like a voice, but subtly, through impulses, through desires, through nightmares, through the stirring of emotions humans did not understand. And humanity, still spiritually young, mistook these whispers for divine inspiration. The first major civilization after the flood arose in the land that would later be called Mesopotamia. Broad rivers cut through fertile plains, attracting families who built the first post-flood settlements. As they grew into towns and towns grew into early city-states, leadership became necessary. This is where the spirits made their move. To these young societies, any extraordinary dream or strange encounter could be interpreted as a sign from the divine, and so the spirits of the giants cloaked themselves in the aura of gods. Humans, eager for connection with the supernatural, accepted the deception easily, and in this way, the first pantheons were born. Not necessarily the full-fledged mythologies recorded later, but the seeds, whispers of sky gods, storm gods, guardian spirits, ancestral lords. Humans believed these beings demanded offerings or obedience, and unknowingly they fed the illusions of the Nephilim spirits. Meanwhile, far below the mountains, the Watchers remained bound in their darkness. For them, time was not measured in days or years, but in despair. Their isolation was unbroken, their senses alive to the movements of their offspring's spirits, but unable to interact. Semyaza could feel the rise of false worship, and each act of misplaced devotion cut him deeper, for he had once been a guardian of humanity's spiritual integrity, tasked with preserving their purity. Now he watched them bow to shadows of his own mistake. Azazel felt something different. Every rediscovery of metalworking, every gradual return to ornamentation and sorcery, sparked a flicker of his influence. To him, the world was slowly crawling back toward the knowledge he had introduced before the flood. His punishment had not broken him, it had only hardened his malice. Michael watched these developments from the borders of heaven with solemn attention. He saw the early Bronze Age rising not just through human innovation, but through corrupted fragments of pre-flood knowledge. He saw empires forming around leaders who claimed to speak with gods, gods who were, in reality, the restless spirits of Nephilim lying about their identities. Raphael observed the early healers and herbalists, monitoring the subtle intrusion of forbidden arts among legitimate medicinal knowledge. Uriel kept careful watch over humanity's spiritual progression. He saw myths forming, legends spreading, ideas crystallizing into religions. He knew that the coming ages would be shaped heavily by what humanity believed in the centuries after the flood, and what they believed, increasingly, was influenced by the dead giants. But the Archangels were not sent to intervene this time. Their role was not to force humanity back onto a righteous path. Heaven had made a decision after the Watchers' fall. Humanity must learn to walk without direct angelic supervision. That decision would shape history. As tribes grew into nations, as people migrated toward new territories, the spirits followed. They attached themselves to leaders, families, locations, objects. They whispered secrets about war, hunting, mating, and ritual. They encouraged practices that mirrored the Watchers' rebellion, mixing spiritual truths with carnal desires. Some humans resisted. Others embraced the whispers eagerly. The first temples rose. The first idols were carved. The first blood rituals began. And though none of these practices were taught by angels, echoes of the Watchers' forbidden teachings vibrated beneath them. During this time, the imprisoned Watchers began to ask a question that would weigh on them for millennia. Is this our fault? Semyaza agonized over this question endlessly. He had never intended for humanity to become enslaved by spirits. He had not foreseen what the Nephilim would become. He had underestimated the consequences of breaking the heavenly boundary. Azazel, however, felt no remorse. The more humanity slipped into violence and vanity, the more he felt vindicated. To him, civilization itself was a battlefield, a place where his ideas would keep resurfacing, no matter how deeply he was buried. Meanwhile, the world continued to change. New tribes moved westward and northward, forming cultures that would eventually become the ancestors of Europe. Others journeyed east, laying foundations for civilizations in India, China, and beyond. Each group carried its own myths, some purely human, others influenced by ancient spirits that drifted across the continents like dark winds. The Nephilim spirits adapted quickly. In some cultures, they took the role of ancestral guardians. In others, they posed as nature gods. In still others, they became feared monsters of legend. And because their power derived from influence, not substance, the more humans believed in them, the stronger their psychological hold became. But control was not their only goal. Some sought revenge for the destruction of their bodies. Some sought dominance. Some sought to corrupt humanity simply because corruption was all they understood. But collectively, these spirits became something new in the world, a hostile, invisible presence that would one day be called the demonic realm. Yet the rise of demons was only one part of the Watcher's ongoing legacy. The second part lay in the gradual reawakening of forbidden knowledge. As humanity moved into the early Bronze Age, tools improved, weapons sharpened, cultures advanced rapidly. Though these innovations were not inherently evil, certain practices clearly traced back to the Watcher's teachings, especially those linked to warfare, cosmetics, and occult magic. Whenever a tribe discovered a new technique, Azazel's influence pulsed faintly from his prison. Whenever a diviner sought signs from the heavens, Kokobel's forbidden astral knowledge shimmered through the night. Whenever writing evolved, Penemu's ancient mistake resurfaced both as a blessing and a potential tool for deceit. Knowledge itself is neutral, but how it is used determines its legacy. During this era, humanity learned to build fortified cities. They learned to create elaborate religious iconography. They learned to form hierarchical societies with divine kingships, a structure often influenced by spiritual entities posing as gods. And with every increase in ambition, the ancient rebellion echoed. Meanwhile, in heaven's courts, the case against the Watchers remained open. Michael awaited the moment of their final sentencing. Uriel studied the unfolding course of history. Raphael tended to the spiritual wounds inflicted upon humanity by lingering demonic presence, but none could intervene prematurely. The divine timeline was precise, and at its heart lay the decree. The Watchers will be bound for 70 generations. But what exactly is a generation? Human generations? Spiritual generations? Cycles of civilization? The ancient texts deliberately obscure the measurement, hinting that the 70-generation span may represent an era rather than a simple numerical count. In any case, the clock was ticking. Humanity spread, civilizations rose, spirits wandered, the Watchers remained in chains. Yet one more development would define this era, the emergence of early kings who claimed divine right not because of heaven, but because of the whispers of spirits. These kings erected temples, summoned rituals, and declared themselves descendants of gods. It was a lie, one born from the imitation of the Nephilim's ancient dominance. And the Watchers sensed it all. From their prisons, they watched the world twist their story. They watched humans worship their children's ghosts. They watched their teachings mutate into religions. They watched the world forget why the flood had come. To some, this was a torment worse than chains. To others, it was a dark triumph. Azazel, in particular, reveled in every resurgence of war, vanity, and sorcery. Semyaza mourned each new generation that slipped away from truth. Other Watchers fell into resignation, expecting that when their 70 generations ended, the world would be unrecognizable. But heaven had not abandoned the world. It had simply changed strategies. Prophets would rise, messengers would emerge, and eventually, a figure would appear who would confront the spirits directly. But that moment was still far in the future. For now, humanity walked between two realms, guided by heaven in silence, tempted by spirits in whispers, and overshadowed by the ancient sins of the Watchers. This era, the era after the flood, but before the great civilizations matured, was crucial in shaping everything that would follow. The stage was set, the players were gathering, the consequences of rebellion were rippling outward across generations, and the Watchers, though imprisoned, still had a role in the story yet to unfold. As centuries unfolded and the world repopulated, humanity entered a new era, one shaped by ambition, curiosity, and the slow resurfacing of knowledge once buried by the flood. Civilizations rose along rivers, the Nile, the Tigris, and Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River, and although the Watchers remained imprisoned deep beneath the earth, their influence echoed through every early kingdom, every mythic lineage, every ritual fire burning in the night. The Age of Shadows gradually transformed into the Age of Kings, and with kings came something else: ideology. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just farming, but architecture. Not just tribes, but nations claiming divine authority. Where did this sudden concept of divine kingship come from? Its roots, ironically, traced back to the Watchers. Before the flood, the Nephilim had ruled humanity with overpowering presence, their sheer size and strength forcing mortals to accept them as gods. Their spirits, still drifting across the earth, whispered into the minds of early rulers, convincing them that they too were chosen by heaven, favored by the gods, born of divine lineage. In reality, these whispers came from the ghosts of giants, not the throne of heaven, yet the deception was powerful, and humanity, eager for structure and meaning, embraced it wholeheartedly. Kings began claiming they were descendants of sky gods or ancient heroes. Some traced their ancestry to mighty men of old, a phrase that originated from memories of the Nephilim. Others believed their ruling power came from beings who once walked the earth, beings whose shadows still wandered unseen. In the cities of Sumer, early rulers built ziggurats, staircase temples meant to reach the heavens. They believed the gods descended on these platforms, but ancient watchers in chains knew the truth. These structures were echoes of Mount Hermon, the mountain where the watchers themselves had once descended. Every brick of every ziggurat was an unintended reminder of their rebellion, and though the watchers could not see the sun, they sensed the stirring of civilizations above them. They felt the vibrations of millions of footsteps. They felt the rise of languages, laws, and literature. They felt the faint pulse of forbidden knowledge resurfacing in human ingenuity. Semyaza, still bound, often wondered if humanity would ever stop imitating the fallen. Each time a king proclaimed himself divine, Semyaza felt a sharp reminder of what his own children had caused before the flood. Azazel, buried in his desert prison, felt something different, a dark satisfaction. Every weapon forged, every sword drawn in battle, every soldier adorned with ornamentation reflected his teachings. His legacy was becoming civilization itself. But heaven was watching. Michael stood vigilant as the spiritual realm grew more complex. Raphael monitored the rise of diseases, medicines, and rituals. Uriel watched humanity seek knowledge with near dangerous zeal. For as well as humanity rebuilt itself, the shadows rebuilt too. The spirits of the Nephilim spread into every cultural gap. They appeared in myths as thunder gods, war gods, ancestor spirits, tricksters, and guardians. They influenced architecture, warfare, and early religious systems. They whispered through oracles, priests, and dreamers. Humanity believed they were receiving divine messages, but the messages came from beings who had once devoured their ancestors. Yet, heaven did not intervene directly. The entire world had become a kind of test. During this era, something else happened, something subtle but incredibly important. Humanity began to search for order in the stars. Astronomy blossomed. People tracked lunar cycles. They noticed the wandering of planets. They mapped constellations and attached myths to them. And who had once taught astral knowledge before the flood? Kokabel, one of the Watchers, Though the heavens themselves revealed truth, the interpretations were twisted by the spirits. Humans began believing the stars controlled fate, that destinies were written in constellations, that the gods communicated through astral signs. Thus was born the earliest form of astrology. Kokabel felt this from his subterranean prison, the misuse of knowledge he had once shared. He knew humans were seeking understanding, but they were building their wisdom atop the ashes of his rebellion. Every watcher felt the same truth. Humanity was repeating spiritual patterns without ever knowing the source. As empires grew, so did the complexity of their myths. Stories of divine couples, pantheons, sacred animals, and cosmic battles filled every region. The spirits behind these myths multiplied their influence. But heaven was not idle. During the Age of Kings, the first whispers of divine messengers emerged. Prophets, servants, individuals chosen not to rule but to warn, to teach, to guide through words rather than visible power. This was heaven's new method. No more watchers, no more direct guardians, no more beings who might fall prey to desire. Now the message would come through humans themselves. Yet even these prophets sometimes struggled to pierce the fog created by the spirits of the giants. Meanwhile, deep beneath the mountains, the watchers grew restless. 70 generations. For them, it felt both distant and imminent. Time in imprisonment is different. Every moment stretches. Every regret echoes. Every memory weighs heavier. Semyaza often replayed the moment of their fall standing on Mount Hermon, making the pact with trembling angels who feared eternal judgment but chose desire over obedience. He remembered the oath they made, to take the daughters of men as wives, to bind themselves together in shared guilt. That oath was the beginning of the end. Now, imprisoned, they awaited final judgment. They knew their fate would not end in mere imprisonment. There was more to come, something far more severe, a punishment not only for their actions, but for the spiritual chaos that rippled across centuries. But something else haunted the Watchers even more. It was the growing realization that humanity would one day misremember everything. In the depths of their prisons, they could faintly sense the evolving stories of mortals above. They could feel the myths being reshaped, casting them as gods, titans, demigods, celestial lovers, or fallen heroes. Entire cultures were rewriting the truth of their rebellion into something glamorous. This troubled the Watchers deeply. Their shame was becoming legend. Their crimes were becoming romance. Their children were becoming gods of nations. The irony cut deeper than any chain. Meanwhile, the spirits of the Nephilim, unable to rest, continued to influence human conflict. They whispered to kings to conquer. They whispered to warriors to kill. They whispered to priests to offer blood. They whispered to women to adorn themselves and to men to covet beauty beyond measure. Their influence was subtle enough to blend with human nature, making the corruption difficult to detect, even for the wise. And so the Age of Kings became an age of war, worship, and wandering loyalties among the divine. The earth grew crowded. Cities flourished. Trade routes stretched across continents. Languages diversified. Technology advanced. And with each innovation, the spirits adapted. They did not need bodies to rule. They needed belief. The more humans believed in their divinity, the more influence they wielded. But there was a breaking point. As humanity grew stronger socially and politically, the lesser spirits began fighting among themselves. Rivalries formed. Regions clashed under the spiritual dominance of different entities. Wars above were reflections of wars below. These conflicts would eventually set the stage for something massive, the emergence of empires guided not only by ambition, but by spiritual ecosystems. Heaven watched closely, for with every passing century, the 70-generation timer drew closer. Michael could feel the tension in the heavens like the tightening string of a bow. Raphael braced for what would happen when the imprisoned spirits were finally judged. Uriel prepared the prophetic knowledge that would one day explain everything. But the Watchers themselves, Semyaza, Azazel, and the rest, felt something different. A shift, a tremor, a stirring in the spiritual realm that indicated the world was moving toward a climax. They did not know when they would be released for judgment. They did not know how humanity would face the truth. They did not know what final punishment awaited them. But they knew this. Their story was not finished, and their influence, direct or indirect, continued to shape the world in ways humanity could not yet comprehend. The next era would bring prophets, nations, covenants, and wars unlike anything the ancient world had seen. And through it all, the shadows of the giants and the sins of the Watchers would remain a hidden thread, weaving through the story of humanity. But everything was moving toward a final encounter, one that would determine the fate of the spiritual realm itself. By the time humanity entered the next great phase of history, the world was no longer young. Civilizations had matured, kingdoms had solidified their borders, and empires rose like mountains, casting shadows across continents. But beneath all this political and cultural development lay something older, something unseen, an undercurrent of spiritual tension that had been growing ever since the Watchers first descended on Mount Hermon. This tension would shape the spiritual identity of the ancient world. Though mortals knew nothing of the prison beneath the earth where the Watchers were held, the influence of their rebellion lived on, whispered through myths, echoed through rituals, embedded into the very structure of early religions. And as humans developed more complex societies, the spirits of the Nephilim also grew more organized, more cunning, more deliberate in their manipulation. This era, the Age of Empires, was not only a time of military expansion, it was a time when the invisible war between heaven and the shadows intensified. To understand how deeply the Watcher's legacy permeated this age, we must explore the civilizations that defined it, the empires of men, and the spirits behind them. As humanity spread, 4 early superpowers began shaping the direction of civilization. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and the Levant each became a hub of spiritual activity, a battleground where divine truth clashed with the deceptive influence of ancient spirits. Egypt rose as a river civilization, stable, predictable, blessed with natural barriers that protected it from invasion. Its belief system centered around gods with animal attributes, falcon-headed sky gods, jackal-headed guardians, reptilian deities. To modern eyes, these figures seem symbolic, but to the Watchers bound beneath the earth, they felt eerily familiar. The Egyptians believed their pharaohs descended from gods and returned to the afterlife as divine beings. This concept did not arise from imagination alone. Rather, it came from ancient whispers, echoes of the Nephilim, who once ruled humanity as semi-divine kings before the flood. The pharaoh system, unknowingly, was a shadow of the pre-flood world. Beneath the sands, the spirits of Nephilim clung to temples, idols, tombs, even mummies. They lingered near places of ritual and death, feeding on belief and fear. And though Egyptians believed they were venerating gods, many were interacting with disembodied giants who craved relevance and influence. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, became the spiritual laboratory of the ancient world. Here arose pantheons of dozens of gods, sky gods, sun gods, moon gods, storm gods. Each deity claimed dominion over aspects of nature or human life. The spirits of the Nephilim, drawn to order and dominance, embedded themselves into these systems. In Sumer, the earliest kings were called Lugal, meaning great man, a title eerily reminiscent of the description of the Nephilim as heroes of old, men of renown. Some scholars believe the earliest royal myths of Sumer are distorted memories of the giants. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest stories, tells of a king described as 2/3 divine, 1/3 man, a direct echo of the hybrid nature of Nephilim. And all the while, beneath the earth, the Watchers felt the sting of their legacy being twisted into glorification. Anatolia and the Hittites. The Hittites, and later the kingdoms of Anatolia, developed pantheons filled with war gods, storm gods, and mountain spirits. Their rituals often centered on appeasing violent deities who demanded sacrifice to prevent catastrophe. These beliefs carried a familiar pattern, the destructive appetites of the giants who once consumed the land before the flood. The Levant. In the lands of Canaan, Phoenicia, and surrounding regions, the influence of the fallen was even more direct. Rituals involving high places, sacred groves, and blood sacrifices paralleled practices the Watchers had taught before the flood. Azazel's influence was unmistakable in these cultures. Heavy use of cosmetics, ritual weaponry, occult divination, war-centric spirituality, and yet humanity believed these developments were organic. Heaven knew otherwise. The Archangels observe the unfolding story. During all of this, the Archangels carried out their roles with unwavering dedication. Michael, commander of the heavenly hosts, observed the ongoing rise of empires with a soldier's calm intensity. He watched kings attribute their victories to false gods. He watched armies spill blood in the name of spirits who had never known mercy. Michael saw the spiritual battlefield expanding, and he knew the time would come when he would fight again, not against the Watchers, who were bound, but against their lingering influence. What concerned him most was how deeply embedded the deception had become. Humans no longer distinguished between divine truth and spiritual manipulation. And that was exactly what the Nephilim spirits wanted. Raphael's role grew more complex. As humanity developed medicine, magic, and healing arts, the line between legitimate knowledge and Azazel's corruption blurred. Some herbs healed, others poisoned. Some rituals purified, others invited demons. His task was not to stop humanity from learning, but to prevent them from destroying themselves with misused knowledge. He watched over healers with compassion and frustration in equal measure. Uriel, keeper of mysteries, observed the spiritual evolution of humanity. He studied the rise of written languages, cuneiform, hieroglyphics, proto-alphabets, and saw that writing, which Penemu had once corrupted, had become a double-edged sword. Writing preserved truth. Writing preserved lies. Writing preserved myths. Writing preserved the names of spirits who should have been forgotten. Some of these texts praised gods who were nothing more than echoes of dead giants. Uriel understood that humanity's spiritual confusion would one day require direct confrontation and revelation. The Watchers, in their prisons. As these civilizations matured above ground, the Watchers endured their sentences in darkness. Their imprisonment was not physical alone. It was sensory deprivation, spiritual suffocation, emotional torment. Semyaza's regret. Semyaza, once their leader, lived in a state between grief and resignation. His voice, once authoritative, had faded into a hollow whisper. He often replayed the night on Mount Hermon when he made the pact. If he had refused, if he had warned them harder, if he had resisted his own desire, the world might have remained untouched by their sin. His children, now demons, roamed aimlessly. His leadership, once a source of pride, had become a wound that never healed. Azazel's defiance. Azazel, however, remained defiant. Buried in the desert cleft of Dudael, cut off from light and sound, he still felt his influence. Every new weapon forged, every ornament worn, every act of sorcery performed reminded him that his legacy was thriving. He did not mourn what he had done. He justified it. He gloried in it. Azazel's thoughts burned like molten metal beneath the sands. The lesser Watchers, others among the 200, watched in disbelief as their teachings resurfaced in human cultures. They no longer recognized the world they had hoped to influence. One wept for how humans used the knowledge of constellations. One mourned how writing, once sacred, became a source of deceit. One regretted how enchantments had become gateways for spirits. But regret does not erase consequences. The Watchers knew their final judgment was coming, the rise of spiritual warfare. During this era, spiritual warfare did not consist of grand cosmic battles. It manifested on the human stage subtly, invisibly, psychologically. The Nephilim spirits competed for influence. False gods warred for worship. Empires fought under the guidance of unseen forces. This warfare spread across several dimensions. 1. Political influence. Kings believed they ruled by divine mandate. This made them bold, proud, and reckless traits. The spirits exploited. 2. Religious deception. Priests claimed visions from gods. Some were illusions created by disembodied giants. 3. Cultural identity. Entire nations developed their identities around spiritual beings that had never walked the earth as gods. 4. Moral corruption. The same temptations that brought the Watchers down began influencing humanity. Forbidden sexual practices, occult rituals, madness for power, obsession with beauty, violence as a means of glory. The world was repeating the sins of pre-flood civilization. But this time, the Watchers watched helplessly. This was their legacy, and they could not change it. Heaven's silence and humanity's misinterpretation. During this time, heaven did not intervene dramatically. This was intentional. Humanity began interpreting this silence as approval of their religions. Priests used it as justification. Kings wielded it as authority. Spirits used it as opportunity. But silence does not equal absence. Heaven was planning, preparing, observing the 70-generation timeline. For the Watchers' judgment would not simply be a trial, it would be a revelation that shattered millennia of human misunderstanding. But before that day, humanity had to walk through the darkness of its own making. The Watchers feel the shift of time. Time in the mortal world passed. Empires rose and fell. Myths changed. Stories grew exaggerated. Yet deep beneath the earth, the Watchers sensed something profound, a shift in cosmic rhythm. It was subtle, like a tremor in the fabric of reality, a sign that the 70 generations were drawing closer to conclusion, a sign that their imprisonment was entering a new phase. They did not know the timeline in mortal years, but they felt the movement of divine judgment approaching. Semyaza whispered to the others, "The world is changing. The time is nearing." Azazel snarled in the darkness, "Let it come." Michael in the heavens readied his sword. Uriel prepared the scrolls of coming prophecy. Raphael steadied his healing hands, and the spirits of the giants shuddered in anticipation, sensing that their own fates were tied to the fate of their fathers. Something enormous was building, something ancient, something inevitable. The Watcher's story was accelerating toward its climax. The world had entered an era of complexity, an age where nations clashed, cultures combined, ideas traveled, and spiritual identities evolved in ways that would reshape history forever. Although humanity believed it was forging its own destiny, the truth lay buried in older roots. The lingering influence of the Watchers and their children still pulsed beneath the surface of every empire, every temple, every conflict. Yet heaven remained patient. The 70-generation countdown continued, and deep beneath the earth, the Watchers began to sense that history was moving toward a convergence point, an era when heaven would reveal truths hidden since the days of Enoch. But before that could happen, the world had to walk through its most turbulent spiritual transformation. This chapter marks the transition from ancient mythology to the early religious world where prophets walked, kingdoms clashed, and humanity began to encounter the invisible realm in new and startling ways. The spiritual landscape of the Near East, the region that would become the spiritual heart of the ancient world, Israel, Canaan, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, was a melting pot of beliefs, rituals, and mythological traditions. Religion was not separate from life. It was life. Every harvest, storm, war, and birth was interpreted through the lens of divine involvement. But while humans saw a pantheon of gods, the Archangels saw a battlefield of spirits. These entities, remnants of the Nephilim, had become so deeply embedded in cultural identities that removing them would have shattered entire empires. Their names shifted from one language to another, morphing into deities of storms, fertility, the underworld, and the heavens. In Canaan they were Baal, Asherah, Dagon. In Babylon they were Marduk, Ishtar, Tammuz. In Egypt they were Horus, Osiris, Set. In Greece they later became Zeus, Apollo, Ares. In Rome, Jupiter, Mars, Venus. Different names, same pattern. And every time humans bowed to one of these beings, the Watchers felt the sting of their ancient failure. The rise of Israel, a different kind of nation. Among the many nations formed after the flood, one stood out not because of power or size, but because heaven chose it as a vessel for truth. Israel was not born like other nations. It was called, formed, intentionally, shaped through covenant, guided through prophecy. Heaven's strategy had shifted. Instead of sending angels, God now worked through humans. Prophets replaced watchers. Visions replaced forbidden teachings. Revelation replaced whispers of spirits. The purpose was clear, to bring light into a world ruled by shadows. When Abraham stepped out of Ur, he walked away from a culture saturated with Nephilim legends and spirit-led divination. His calling was a direct challenge to the spiritual systems of his time, and this was not lost on the Watchers. Semyaza felt the disturbance from deep below. Azazel snarled at the movement toward monotheism. Other imprisoned angels trembled at the idea that heaven was preparing something that could undo the influence of their rebellion. But this was only the beginning. Moses and the revelation at Sinai. Centuries later, Moses encountered a presence unlike anything humanity had known since the days when angels walked among men. But this was not a watcher. This was not a spirit of the dead giants. This was not an echo of ancient knowledge. This was heaven itself speaking. The revelation at Sinai was a seismic event in the spiritual world. When the mountains shook and the fire descended, the imprisoned watchers felt the trembling through the depths of the earth. They recognized that familiar power, the same power that had once judged them, bound them, and sentenced them to the abyss. When Moses received the law, something profound happened. Humanity was given direct divine guidance without the need for angelic intermediaries. This was heaven, correcting the mistake of the Watchers' era. Instead of angels teaching forbidden knowledge, God gave instruction openly. What is good? What is evil? What is sacred? What is forbidden? What leads to life? What leads to corruption? And many of these laws directly countered the sins of the Watchers and their offspring. Forbidden sexual practices, echoes of the Watchers' unions. Forbidden sorcery and divination, echoes of Azazel's teachings. Forbidden worship of idols, stars, and carved images, echoes of Kokobel, Penemu, and other fallen angels. The law of Moses was not simply a moral code, it was a spiritual defense system. The giants of Canaan, perhaps the most startling continuation of the Watchers' legacy, came during the entry into the land of Canaan, because the flood destroyed the original Nephilim, but not the possibility that their corrupted DNA could reappear through spiritual influence or preserved genetic fragments. Scripture describes tribes in Canaan whose size and strength shocked the Israelite spies. Anakim, Rephaim, Emim, Zamzumim, names whispered across generations. These tribes were not full Nephilim, but they were descendants of ancient giants or influenced by the same spiritual corruption that had produced the original hybrids. Their presence terrified the Israelites, who compared themselves to grasshoppers. The Watchers, from beneath the earth, felt the echo of their old world, returning giants, walking the land again, smaller but still formidable. Semyaza felt sorrow. Azazel felt pride. Michael felt righteous anger, because this was not random. This was not accidental. This was a spiritual attempt to reclaim the land. Canaan, the land chosen for Israel, was saturated with the influence of the ancient spirits. These tribes represented spiritual occupation attempts by dark forces to hold on to territory that heaven intended for its chosen people. Thus, the battles recorded in Joshua were more than military engagements. They were spiritual cleansing operations. a confrontation between the remnants of the Watchers' rebellion and the divine plan for humanity. The Watchers felt every victory, every defeat, every giant that fell, every stronghold that crumbled. For them, it was another reminder that their lineage was doomed. King David and the fall of the last giants. Generations later, during the reign of King David, the final chapters of the giant clans unfolded. Goliath, the Philistine champion, was one of the last living links to the ancient giants, massive, powerful, and born of a lineage that refused to die quietly. When David defeated Goliath, it wasn't just a military victory. It was a spiritual proclamation. The age of giants was over. The age of divine truth had begun. To heaven, this was another milestone. To the spirits of the Nephilim, it was another humiliation. To the Watchers, it was a death knell, final proof that their legacy was collapsing. David's reign brought peace, order, and worship of the one true God. It was a blow to every spirit pretending to be a god. And though Israel would continue to struggle, the spiritual identity of the nation had been secured. The Watchers feel the approach of their final judgment. As the world moved from Bronze Age to Iron Age, the Archangels sensed the countdown accelerating. Michael sharpened his sword, not physically, but spiritually, through preparation. Uriel studied prophecies that spoke of end times and final judgments. Raphael tended to the spiritual damage caused by demonic influence. Below the earth, the Watchers felt something shift. The weight of their chains seemed heavier. The silence around them grew tighter. The spiritual realm above vibrated with anticipation. They realized something terrifying. We are nearing the 70 generations. The imprisoned angels began feeling the approach of events foretold long ago, events involving not just the judgment of nations, but the judgment of spiritual beings themselves. Semyaza whispered in dread, "The day comes when our fate will be spoken." Azazel laughed in darkness, "Let them try to judge me." But even he felt the tremors of coming doom, the rise of prophets, the fall of giants, the formation of Israel, the decline of pagan power, the steady revelation of divine truth. All of it pointed to a climax the Watchers could not escape. Humanity was changing. The spiritual world was shifting. The divine timeline was accelerating, all while the Watchers remained bound, waiting for a judgment that would make the flood look like a whisper. Their final reckoning was coming, and the world they once knew was preparing for the arrival of someone who would confront the spirits directly, not with chains, but with authority they could not comprehend. By the time the ancient world transitioned from the Iron Age into the age of prophets, philosophers, and empires, the invisible war that had begun with the Watchers' rebellion had reached a new and volatile stage. Humanity had grown more organized, more ambitious, and more spiritually aware. Nations clashed not only for land and power, but for belief systems, each shaped to some degree by echoes of the fallen. Yet heaven was not absent. It was preparing, slowly, deliberately, and with an authority that the imprisoned Watchers could feel like pressure through the stone above them. This chapter marks the era in which the spiritual and human narratives collided in ways the world had never seen before. It was the prelude to the ultimate confrontation, the time when heaven's plan and the Watchers' legacy would collide on the world stage. The world before the revelation. The ancient world had become a network of empires: Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, each rising not only through military power but also through spiritual ideologies. Temples, idols, divination centers, and mystery religions dominated public life. Every empire believed its gods ensured victory. Heaven saw very differently. To Michael, Raphael, and Uriel, these gods were faceless pretenders, spirits of the Nephilim, manipulating nations but powerless against true divine authority. And beneath the earth, the Watchers watched through spiritual instinct, unnervingly aware that the world was inching closer to an event they could neither stop nor predict. The prophetic age begins. As pagan mythology reached its peak, heaven initiated the next phase, the prophetic age. This was the era when divine messages were delivered through chosen humans, not angels. Why? Because the rebellion of the Watchers had forever changed heaven's strategy. No more supernatural overseers, no more direct angelic teaching, no more risks of transgression. Now, humans would carry the truth. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, prophets emerged with visions that shook nations. They confronted kings, dismantled idolatry, warned of judgment, and revealed glimpses of cosmic events unseen since the days of Enoch. The imprisoned Watchers felt the vibrations of these prophecies, especially the visions describing the final judgment of spiritual beings. Semyaza trembled when Isaiah spoke of the day the Lord punishes the host of heaven imprisoned in pits. Azazel raged when Ezekiel denounced sorcery, vanity, and bloodshed, the very pillars of his ancient corruption. The warnings pierce the abyss like distant thunder. The spiritual realm grows unstable. The Nephilim spirits demons were no longer content to remain in the shadows. As human civilizations became more connected, these spirits adapted to new opportunities. They influenced rulers, kings, queens, and conquerors, claimed divine dreams and visions, many of which came from spirits seeking dominance. They infiltrated religions. New mystery cults emerged. Orphism, Mithraism, the Eleusinian mysteries, each blending truth and deception in a way that mirrored the Watchers' forbidden teachings. They manipulated philosophy. In Greece, thinkers explored the nature of the soul, the gods, and destiny. Some ideas aligned with truth, others were guided by deceptive spiritual influence. They intensified warfare. Battles became ritualized. Sacrifice grew more elaborate. Conquerors like Assyria and Babylon used brutality so extreme it felt almost inhuman, echoing the violence of the Nephilim. And yet heaven remained patient, because something was coming. Someone was coming. Someone who would not just resist the spirits, but command them. This someone would step into the world at a moment when human history and spiritual corruption reached a critical intersection. The Watchers sensed it, even if they couldn't understand it. The rise of empires and the old god's last stand. Between the prophets and the coming revelation, empires rose that would echo across eternity. Assyria, a war machine fueled by domination, cruelty, and fear often attributed to the influence of violent spirits. Babylon, a cultural and spiritual powerhouse, deeply connected to astrology, magic, and monumental architecture reminiscent of the old Watcher-era knowledge. Persia, a vast empire where spiritual dualism flourished, light versus darkness, good versus evil, a worldview that reflected the cosmic war between heaven and the Watcher's legacy. Greece, a civilization where philosophy, polytheism, and hero worship collided. Greek myths, filled with semi-divine heroes and god-human unions, were shadows of the Nephilim stories passed through cultural memory. Rome, the empire that united the ancient world, politically powerful, militarily dominant, and spiritually eclectic. These empires were not simply historical forces. They were the final strongholds of the old gods, the last, desperate attempts of the Nephilim spirits to maintain control over humanity. And heaven watched as the world moved toward a singular moment of revelation. The Watchers feel the approach of a new power. Deep in their prisons, the Watchers felt something different, something they had never sensed before. A presence, a shift, an approaching authority that was not merely angelic, but far greater. The spiritual atmosphere changed. It was like the earth inhaled sharply. It was like heaven leaned closer. It was like time itself trembled. Semyaza felt dread wash over him. Azazel felt anger erupt like fire. Others felt only confusion. "What is this?" whispered one of the lesser Watchers. "It is the one they foretold," murmured another. The 70-generation timer was nearly complete. The world was preparing for the arrival of a being who would expose the spirits, dismantle their deceptions, and confront the legacy of the Watchers head-on. The spiritual realm. Before this arrival, something strange began happening across the ancient world. 1. Demonic activity spiked. More cases of possession, madness, unexplained violence, and spiritual oppression occurred. These were not myths, they were symptoms of a world about to be upended. 2. The gods grew restless. Temples reported unusual signs, statues toppling, oracles giving chaotic messages, rituals failing to produce results. The spirits felt threatened by a power they didn't recognize. 3. Angelic activity increased. Michael, Uriel, and Raphael appeared more frequently, guiding individuals, delivering visions, preparing the faithful. 4. Prophecies converged. Across Israel, Greece, Persia, and other regions, prophecies began speaking of a coming king, a divine son, a bringer of light, a restorer of justice, a destroyer of spiritual darkness. Heaven was preparing an event the Watchers had feared since their imprisonment, the return of a divine presence to earth, but not in the form of angels. This time, heaven would enter the world directly. The Watchers remember the prophecy of Enoch. In their darkest moments, the Watchers remembered the words of Enoch, the man who walked into heaven without dying. He had warned them, "You will see the destruction of your children. You will see the world judged. You will be bound for many generations. And after that, your judgment will come." But Enoch also spoke of another figure, one who is chosen, one who will sit on a throne of glory, one before whom every spirit must bow, one who will judge the angels. The Watchers had dismissed the prophecy once. Now they felt its truth approaching like a storm, the dawn of the new era. When the 70-generation timeline neared its end, heaven began to move. Angels appeared in dreams again, not to teach forbidden arts, but to announce the coming of something holy. A star appeared in the heavens, not the astral teachings of Kokabel, but a sign marking the arrival of divine authority. Prophecy converged from every direction. Isaiah, Daniel, Micah, and even foreign seers had all pointed to the same future moment. The Watchers trembled. For the first time since their rebellion, the boundary between heaven and earth was opening again. But this time, the descent would not be of rebels. It would be of redemption. And the one who came would carry an authority the Watchers never possessed, a power that would confront the spirits of the giants, expose the false gods, and set the stage for the final judgment of the fallen angels. The world was ready. The heavens were ready. The archangels were ready. The timeline was complete. And the Watchers, deep beneath the earth, felt their chains tighten in anticipation. Something had arrived on earth that frightened even them. What came next would forever divide history into before and after. The 70 generations were complete, not in a single moment, not with a shudder of the earth or a roar from the heavens, but with a quiet birth in a forgotten corner of the ancient world. No storms split the sky, no mountains trembled, no divine fire fell. Instead, heaven entered the world the way a seed pushes gently through soil, softly, silently, yet carrying the force to break empires, expose spirits, and overturn the oldest rebellion in cosmic history. The Watchers felt it first, long before shepherds saw angels, long before astrologers noticed a new star, long before mortals realized anything had changed. The imprisoned Watchers sensed the arrival. It was like warmth piercing the abyss, like light leaking beneath a door locked for millennia, like the presence they had once known in heaven. A presence they had forfeited, a presence they could never approach again. Semyaza felt dread wrap around him like chains. Azazel felt hatred burn hotter than the stones of Dudael. The lesser Watchers trembled in confusion. "What is this?" whispered one. "Who has come?" asked another. "Judgment," Semyaza murmured. "Judgment draws near." But it wasn't judgment that arrived first. It was authority. Authority unlike anything the Watchers had ever known. The arrival of the Chosen One. While the world slept, the Chosen One, the one Enoch had foretold, was born in a small village with no political power, no military importance, and no reputation. Heaven moved with strategy so profound that the spirits of the giants could not understand it. They were creatures of strength. They valued dominance. They measured power by size, fear, and force. So, when heaven chose humility, they panicked. The birth of the chosen one rippled through the spiritual world like the first tremor of a cosmic earthquake. Demons shrieked in places no human ear could hear. False gods trembled in their temples. Idols cracked. Oracles went silent. The old spirits sensed the arrival of someone who carried the authority to command them. For the first time, they felt fear. This fear spread downward into the abyss, into the caverns where the watchers were bound. Semyaza whispered, "The Son of Man, he has come." Azazel spat. "He will fail. They always fail." But deep inside, even Azazel felt something cold, a dread that not even pride could extinguish. The spiritual world erupts. From the moment the chosen one grew into adulthood, the spiritual realm became unstable. Possessions increased. Demonic manifestations became more violent. False prophets multiplied. Pagan temples experienced disturbances, statues falling, priests collapsing, sacrifices rejected. Why? Because the spirits knew their time was running out. The Nephilim spirits, demons, had existed without challenge since the flood. They had manipulated empires, fueled wars, created religions, and fed on human fear for millennia. But now, someone had arrived who could see through them, someone who knew who they were, someone who could cast them out with a single word. When the chosen one began his ministry, the first spirits to encounter him reacted with terror. "Have you come to destroy us? We know who you are." Those cries shook the abyss. The watchers, hearing the panic of their own children, understood the truth plainly. The chosen one had not come merely to preach. He had come to reclaim the world from the corruption they began. Michael moves. When the chosen one confronted spirits publicly, Michael, the great prince, the warrior of heaven, watched closely. He stood ready at the boundary between heaven and earth, guarding the mission. This was not Michael's fight. Not yet, but he knew the moment was coming. The final judgment of the watchers, the prophecy spoken to Enoch, was approaching like a silent storm. Michael prepared his legions. He polished his sword, not for war against men, but for the ultimate cosmic tribunal, Raphael's role. Raphael watched the chosen one heal the sick, restore sight, mend bodies, and calm storms. To Raphael, this was more than compassion. It was spiritual reclamation. Every healing pushed back corruption. Every miracle reclaimed what the Watcher's teachings had broken. Every restoration was a direct reversal of Azazel's legacy. Raphael took note. His role in the final judgment would come soon. Uriel's calculations. Uriel, the keeper of mysteries, understood the implications of every prophecy fulfilled by the chosen one. He watched scripture align with cosmic events. He saw ancient visions come to life before his eyes. The 70 generations, the Son of Man prophecy, the judgment of angels, the cleansing of the spiritual realm. Uriel knew exactly what was about to happen. The chosen one would not only confront demons, he would judge the watchers themselves. The time had come, the final night, the veil tears. When the chosen one was betrayed, arrested, and crucified, the spirits of the Nephilim rejoiced. They believed they had won. They believed they had eliminated the only threat capable of exposing them. Azazel laughed in his prison. "Is this your king? This is the judge of angels?" But the moment the chosen one breathed his final breath, something happened that shook the entire cosmos. The veil of the temple tore in two, from top to bottom, symbolizing a seismic shift in spiritual authority. The spirits froze in terror. Demons screamed. Idols toppled. Mountains trembled. The earth groaned. And beneath the ground, in the pit of their imprisonment, the watchers felt their chains tighten. This was not defeat. It was the beginning of dominion, because in his death, the chosen one entered the spiritual realm, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. He descended into the world of spirits. He approached the abyss. He stood before the imprisoned watchers. and with a voice that echoed through creation, he declared, "Your judgment has come." Semyaza collapsed in despair. Azazel raged in defiance. The others trembled unceasingly. This was the moment Enoch had foretold, the moment the 70 generations reached their climax, the moment heaven confronted the ancient rebels face to face. The Chosen One proclaimed their verdict, a verdict sealed long ago, a verdict that could not be reversed. They would remain imprisoned until the final judgment of the world, and then be cast into the lake of fire for all eternity. This was the fate from which there was no appeal, and even the proud Azazel fell silent. The resurrection. Cosmic aftershock. When the Chosen One rose from the dead, it was not a mere miracle. It was a cosmic announcement. Life had defeated death. Truth had defeated deception. Heaven had defeated the legacy of the Watchers. The demons understood immediately. Their power was broken. Their influence was limited. Their doom was sealed. They would continue to roam until the end of the age, but they no longer ruled the spiritual world uncontested. And the Watchers, their fate was final, the ascension, the throne of judgment. When the Chosen One ascended to heaven, the imprisoned Watchers felt the heavens roar with glory, and then silence, absolute, crushing silence, because they understood he had taken the throne of judgment. He had received authority over all spirits. He had become the ruler whom Enoch had described millennia earlier, and now he waited for the last day, the day when the Watchers would be thrown into the eternal fire prepared for them. Semyaza wept uncontrollably. Azazel fought against chains that would never break. The lesser Watchers whispered ancient regrets. The abyss grew darker. Their story was over. They would never walk the earth again. They would never see heaven again. They would never escape the prison they created for themselves. They were rebels who fell, fathers of monsters, corrupters of humanity, teachers of forbidden law, and now, eternal prisoners, the legacy of the Watchers. Their influence lingers still, in myths, in religions, in occult traditions, in legends of gods and titans. But these are echoes, distorted memories of a rebellion that ended beneath the weight of divine judgment. The Watchers' fate is sealed. Their story is complete, and humanity walks forward, not as slaves to spirits, but as witnesses to a cosmic victory, a victory that broke the chains of the ancient rebels and restored authority to heaven alone. Their fall changed the world. Their imprisonment reshaped the spiritual realm. Their judgment fulfilled prophecy, and their end stands as a warning, etched into eternity. No rebellion can withstand the sovereignty of heaven. Their story began with desire. It ended with chains, and their memory lives on, not in glory, but in caution.